Here's the deal. I want to share something with you. I want to show you something in my Studio One setup that I don't talk about a lot, but it's a really valuable conversation that I think you and I need to have. So as you know, I use Studio One. I've used Studio One for at least a decade now. Before that, I was a Pro Tools guy. Loved it. Worked great. And I used Logic for about a year in the interim. That was great too. Started using Studio One, had some work that I was doing for a job at the time, needed to use Studio One to learn how it works, and fell in love with it. And before I knew it, I bought a new computer a year later, installed Studio One, never even bothered to install the other DAWs that I owned because I was so all in on Studio One. Now, here's the thing that may be surprising to a lot of people. I'm going to check out Studio One. I want to show you all the third-party plugins that I own in Studio One. So plugins that I've purchased that are not included with Studio One, that are made by other manufacturers, other software developers that I incorporate into my Studio One workflow. You ready? If you go to your Effects tab, if you look up here, you'll see that you can have a couple different ways of sorting your plugins. One is by vendor, which is essentially by manufacturer. And then all the manufacturers show up as folders. So Apple is just the ones that are included on my computer that I never use. PreSonus are all the ones that come with Studio One, and then this is the only other one. And it's a single solitary plugin. The Pro L2 is a really cool limiter that I use for mastering. Half of the reason I use it is because it gives this really cool readout across the screen, kind of showing what's happening when I run actual audio through it. So it gives you almost like this history of what's happening in the sound, and you can visually see what limiting is happening over time. It gives you this kind of trail of history of how terribly you're limiting something. Anyway, this is not a commercial for that. Point being, you don't see any other plugins in this list. This is it. This is the only mixing plugin that I've purchased in the last decade. Now, why am I telling you this? You might say, well, of course, Joe, you've worked for PreSonus. You're making videos on the PreSonus channel. Of course, you only use PreSonus. This has been true long before I did anything with PreSonus. And the story goes like this. Years ago, I worked for a manufacturer or for a retailer in the audio space. And one of the things all the plugin companies do is they would give salespeople free licenses to the software because they wanted you to use it, because they wanted you to sell it. That makes sense. I had so many different plugins that when I would go to pick an EQ, the whole screen would fill up with EQ options. Guess how long I could do that before I got exhausted? Yeah, not very long. Like literally, I would go to something like this and say, I would like an EQ. And I would open this folder. This was back when I was using Pro Tools. And quite literally, it would fill up the screen with just lists of EQ plugins that I could use. Now, you may hear that and say, oh, that sounds amazing. I will tell you, not amazing. Yes, I'm not saying anything against really cool plugins. Plugins are cool. Plugins are cool. Plugins are cool. But having that many options was crippling in the studio. It made me not even want to bother because I'd have to go sit down and make a pro-con list of every time I wanted to put a plugin in. Which plugin am I going to use this time? And if I kept using the same plugin every time, I'd feel guilty. Well, I should go use all these other plugins. So for some reason, and it wasn't really a conscious decision even, but I started using Studio One. I didn't install any of those plugins. I maybe installed one bundle for a little while. And I even stopped using that because I found what's more fun than a bunch of new plugins is just making music. That was it. It's more fun to make music and just use the tools in the software and spend all my creative energy on making music and then mixing it. And it turns out the tools didn't matter all that much at all. To be fair, PreSonus over the years launched cool things like this, Fat Channel, with all these different compressors and EQs. So a lot of the benefits of some of those third-party plugins that would do all these cool console emulations, all of that is a little less intriguing because I've got not everything, but I've got a bunch of different flavors of things like compressors and EQs available now that I even feel less like I need to go out and get other plugins to give me different sounds and tones that I want. So the question is, what's the purpose of these plugins if you can do... Sorry, let me back up. Here's my point. Do you need to be like me and not buy any plugins? No. Do whatever makes you happy. But if you find yourself with a huge collection of plugins and you don't have a huge list of songs that you've released, you got a problem. Your priorities are mixed up. I would rather, if it's just a one-to-one relationship, you have fewer plugins and more releases. That's the dirty little secret about how I'm able to release so much music. Part of it, there's a lot of reasons, but part of it is I'm not spending much time worried about the gear that I'm using. I'm just using the gear that's in front of me to make great music. And here's another thing. I've had people reach out to me and say, man, my studio's been down for 2 months because I upgraded computers. My old computer crashed or something like that. And it's taking me so long because I don't have a lot of time to dedicate, right? I've got a job and busy life, but when I do get in the studio, I'm spending so much time reinstalling all my old plugins and making sure that they work and activating and all that whole thing. And I will ask them, and I've done this before, literally done this and said, well, do you use those plugins? And it's shocking how many times they say, no, I don't. And it's this fascinating thing where they are spending so much time installing all these plugins they've bought over the years because they've got this sunk cost bias of, well, I spent money on it, therefore I need to at least have it installed in my system so I can use it. I understand that. But if you haven't used it in the last 3 years and you keep reinstalling it with every new computer that you get because you just feel like you're supposed to, I encourage you to just let that go. Guess what? I got a new computer. This is an M1 MacBook Pro. Got it about a year ago, and my installation process was super simple. I logged into my PreSonus account, downloaded the Studio One installer, and then I logged into FabFilter and downloaded the installer for the Pro L2. Installed both, and I'm done. I am making music. Why does this matter? Well, some of it is every software manufacturer has its own process for activation, and a lot of times when you've got issues with your DAW not behaving properly, at least from my experience, it's been because there's a lot of other third-party things there that aren't behaving like they're supposed to. I have not had any of those issues in the decade that I've been using Studio One because I just use the plugins that come with Studio One. They sound great. There's a lot of flexibility, especially now with things like Dynamic EQ in Pro EQ, all the fat channel resources that you get. We have the de-esser plugin now. Like, there's very little that I need to be able to do that I can't do with stock plugins in Studio One. So I encourage you, if you're thinking, the reason I'm not making great sounding music is that I don't have all the fancy plugins, you are incorrect. If nothing else, I am proof that you can make great sounding music without all the fancy plugins. And of course, go listen to my music. If you think my music sounds like hot garbage, then you can disregard this entire message. But go look up my name, Joe Gilder, whatever your streaming platform of choice is. You will hear I am not releasing hot garbage. And I'm not using thousands and thousands of dollars of extra plugins. So the variable must not be the plugins. All right, that's it for my sermon for today. I just wanted to share that with you. If you are like me and your list of plugins is very small and is mostly just PreSonus stuff, you are not weird. You are not alone. You are in an elite class, I would say, because you're just focused on making music, and that's what really matters. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.